Okay, for those of you returning to the channel, welcome back, and for those of you that are new here, that have just stumbled upon this video, then thank you for joining me. And here is my spoiler-free review of Fantastic Four First Steps, directed by Matt Shakman, and it's the 37th installment within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, wow, who would have thought back in 2008, watching Iron Man for the first time, like I remember it like it was yesterday, that I would end up talking about the 37th movie within the universe that it establishes in that very first movie, Iron Man. Like, it's just amazing, isn't it? But yeah, here we are, Fantastic Four First Steps. It's the second reboot when it comes to the live action adaptation of the Fantastic Four. And so based within their 1960s inspired retro futuristic world, the Fantastic Four are forced to balance their roles as heroes and with the strength of their family bond. The Fantastic Four must defend Earth from a ravenous space god called Galactus and his herald, the Silver Surfer. And there's a reason why I made the point there of just reflecting, back to 2008 with Iron Man and with it being the 37th installment within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There is a reason. And that's because this movie, Fantastic Four First Steps, was very much, like, for me anyway, personally, it felt like it was going back to basics. That the MCU, Marvel, the filmmakers, the writers, they were going back to basics. Just like with that first Iron Man movie, where it's about this character, Tony Stark, and his journey. Yes, it's an origin story, whereas First Steps isn't, but it's very, character driven. It's, it's not the most complex thing ever. It's not emotionally intense or profound or anything, but you have a character that you can get behind emotionally and care about, and there's an arc. There's a journey there, and there's a heart right within the centre of its story. And that was what Fantastic Four was for me, First Steps. It was like going back to the beginning again, and just having this kind of very focused, character-driven story with a big beating heart. It's about this family unit, where they go up against these different challenges and this moral dilemma of doing the right thing and being torn between the ones you love and those you're protecting, and the relationships with one another, that the family dynamic. You have all these very real human basic themes. Again, nothing incredibly profound, but it's very much focused on its characters, that the human aspect of its story. It was the driving force behind the movie, behind its story, and it was very much welcomed for me. Like, I just really appreciated that approach to telling this story. The relationship between Reed Richards and Sue Storm takes centre stage within this story. They are sort of the big beating heart, really, of this story. That's where the real focus is. And it's just how that relationship is affected by, going up against all the odds, this big cosmic entity that is Galactus. How that sort of big fantastical science fiction element of the story affects these very real human emotions and this relationship between one another. And that is just something that I really enjoyed. It's something that I really appreciated about the direction with this story and the focus within this story. Does it always work? Do they always get it right? No. But when it comes to the human aspect and the themes that they are exploring within its story, they were a hell of a lot more effective than they were, say, with Thunderbolts. Which, again, with Thunderbolts, they explore some very real, human, grounded, dark themes. But it just didn't quite work for me. Yeah, I felt like they were a hell of a lot more effective at that the human aspect of its story. Yes, it's basic. Yes, it's not the most profound, emotionally intense experience you're gonna get in the cinema this year, but it still worked. It still hit emotionally when it needed to. It managed to get you behind these characters, and it didn't just end up feeling like another stepping stone to the next big event movie like the Avengers. It wasn't too focused on sort of connecting to everything else within the MCU. It was very much a focused, character-driven story, for me personally anyway. And again, you know, I'm not saying that Fantastic Four First Steps is an emotionally intense or profound experience. You know, it's not suffocated by its themes because it always remembers it's a Marvel movie. You know, for example, the classic MCU humour is still intact here, though at the same time not quite as intense as in previous movies. But what First Steps is, or what is for me, is a return to what makes these stories special for me, that makes them worthwhile. It's that human story, the character's journey and their relationships. Everything else, you know, the connections to the bigger, wider picture of within the MCU is all just secondary. And that's been one of the biggest issues that I've had with the MCU in recent years. Like, I haven't really, you know, there's not many that I've really hated. I think the Marvels, from what I can remember, was perhaps one of the worst for me, one of the worst Marvel movie experiences. But they'd kind of fallen into this trap of just having these standalone movies to just sort of, they just felt like they were there to build up sort of, you know, anticipation to that next big event movie, whatever, you know, like an Avengers movie, for example. Whereas First Steps, it's back to basics. In many ways, it's back to form. It's not perfect, but it's back to kind of what made the first phase work and allow the MCU to truly lift off and come to life, you could say. And to touch back on what I said about them not always getting it right, that it doesn't always work. You know, this is not a perfect experience. And what I mean by that is, at times this experience does feel quite condensed. It feels like we are missing moments of character, whether it be with Ben Grimm and John Storm and their relationship, or the relationship between brother and sister. They just sometimes feel a little cast aside, almost like supporting characters, you could say. Though in turn, this does allow room for the relationship of Reed and Sue to really fully breathe, to truly come to life. But as a result, I felt the dynamic between the family of four didn't always reach the full potential of what they were attempting here, I felt, with its themes, especially around family. But it still worked because the heart remains intact. The heart is always felt, even though it does feel a little condensed, and I feel like we are missing moments, especially with Ben Grimm. I felt like his was the character that kind of suffered the most. It still works because that pulse, the beating heart of its story, always remains intact. Like, this is another superhero movie that we've had recently, along with Superman, that I felt like an additional 15 to 20 minutes maybe wouldn't have hurt the overall experience. In fact, I felt like Fantastic Four First Steps and Superman share a lot of the same issues that I had. I mean, they're both movies that throw you into these already established worlds, and they do it with ease. At the same time, even though they've both got kind of different intensities when it comes to the energy that's propelling the narrative forward, like Superman was very much more chaotic, you could say, than Fantastic Four, whereas Fantastic Four does have perhaps a much slower pace and just does allow sort of more time for characters to sort of come to life. At the same time, they both end up feeling quite condensed, and it wouldn't have harmed with having that additional 15 to 20 minutes of these character moments that I feel like are missing from both experiences. But the both experiences work because the heart always remains intact. They've got issues, they're not perfect, but there's still experiences that kind of suck you into their stories, and you care about the characters, and you can feel the threat, and you can feel the urgency. Especially with First Steps, that kind of the high stakes and sort of the threat of this kind of big, gigantic, cosmic entity is beautifully realised here in a way where it just immerses you right into the story and results in what I felt was quite a fun, thrilling, entertaining experience where I actually cared about our main characters and their story. And the reason to why you could feel the sort of the threat. The reason why the threat feels real, and you could feel the intensity behind it. You know, for example, there's moments with the Silver Surfer and she's chasing after the Fantastic Four and you've got this black hole and everything, and it's a fantastic scene. Like, it was fun, it was thrilling, but you could feel the threat. You could feel the intensity behind sort of the high stakes. Like, the high stakes feel real and authentic. And I just feel like that's because of the way in which the world is brought to life here and visualised. You know, how it's brought to life within the frame. There is a weight there. And a lot of that is helped or aided by the kind of the mix of practical and CGI. Like, it was such a pleasure to see a blend and some good use of practical effects within this movie. You know, it's what allows this kind of very familiar but also alien world feel very much, feels real. It feels like our characters are there living within this world, and that's because of all these different elements in how they bring this story to life from a visual perspective, from a technical perspective. Like, yes, there's still a lot of CGI within the movie, and there are moments and certain characters where I felt like maybe they could have done things slightly different, but overall it was just a pleasure to sit down and watch a Marvel movie and see that there was an attempt there to bring a lot of this world to life through practical effects. Like, the fucking rocket ship is an actual model, and you could sense it, you can feel it, it feels more tangible, and it adds so much more weight then, you know, to what is a very high fantasy science fiction experience. Like, and that's another aspect that I loved about this movie. Like, I loved the retro, the 1960s retro futuristic aesthetic to this movie. I think it's great, and it also has this kind of very 90s, early 2000s approach to sort of how it's structured narratively, just how the overall movie is structured. It has that kind of retro 90s to early 2000s vibe to it, as well as a splash of 80s high fantasy and science fiction. And I absolutely adored that. Like, it took, at times, this movie took me back to films like Jason and the Argonauts. So there's actually, what I felt was, there was a little bit of a nod to Jason and the Argonauts within the movie. It's in the third act. And it just had me beaming like a Cheshire cat. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. But it definitely took me back to a certain moment in Jason and the Argonauts, as well as Star Wars, that classic, escape from the Death Star, and you've got the TIE fighters in pursuit with the Millennium Falcon, and there was just a lot within this film from a sort of a creative perspective that I really admired, I really appreciated, and I just ended up having a really good time with it, and especially visually. Like, I love how they kind of bring the layer of Galactus to life, and just the presence of Galactus is really felt. Like, you could feel the kind of the impending doom and the horror and what this entity is capable of, and it's all aided as well by Ralph Ineson, who voices Galactus. He's just an incredible presence, just through his voice alone adds so much weight to the character. But I really like how Galactus was sort of visualized, how he was brought to life from the sound design, and how the character would be framed as well, which allowed, again, sort of added to sort of the weight of certain moments. And then, in turn, all of what I just said, from how this movie is crafted from a technical perspective with the use of practical effects, and sort of how, Galactus is brought to life, and how, sort of how the world, this kind of very familiar but alien world, is brought to life. It's all then aided by that focus that I've already mentioned, which is its characters. None of it would have really have mattered. Like, yes, I could have appreciated the movie from a visual and technical perspective, but it doesn't matter if you don't care about its characters. And it doesn't matter, how complex it is. I mean, it's like I said, this is not going to be the most complex experience you're ever going to, sit through, but there's enough there for you to get behind its characters and care about them. It has a big beating heart, and that is what kind of then really cements that weight. It's what really kind of adds the overall weight to this experience. And it's all those different ingredients that allow sort of to bring this experience to life in a way that just sucks you into its story, no matter how fantastical it gets. Like I said, touching back on sort of the kind of the, you know, it felt very much high fantasy science fiction. It is quite out there. At the same time, I was there immersed with these characters. I felt the threat and I cared. And it's very rare to get that, especially in a Marvel movie. And I felt like they achieved it here. For example, and by the way, this might be a minor spoiler. So I think for me personally, it's a very minor spoiler. But if you don't want to be spoiled at all, sort of skip ahead maybe for a minute. You know, it depends how long I ramble on for. But with that being said, you know, there's a moment where the Fantastic Four are being chased by the Silver Surfer and they're in this wormhole. And just the way that scene is brought to life visually, like, it's quite out there. Like, it's, you know, it's almost like a blend of Star Wars and Interstellar from a visual perspective and just the way in which the scene plays out. It's an awful lot of fun. But the reason why I care and why I'm sort of caught up within that moment is, again, as I've said quite a few times now in this review, is that focus on its characters and their journey. Yes, it's not the most complex thing ever, but you care. And that's where the intensity is. That's where the weight really is. And sort of allows everything else then to sort of come together and bring to life what feels like a very much lived-in world, and a world that just sucks you right into it because it's got that big beating heart. And I think all of the cast did a great job here. Julia Garner as the Silver Surfer, I really like. Like, she's not in a massive, you know, her role is quite pivotal to the story, but she's very brief. Like, the moments with her are quite brief. Like, you know, she doesn't have an awful lot of screen time. But when she is on the screen, again, there's a presence there. Like, I like the CGI. At times, it's a little bit like, but then there are moments then that are like, wow, that looks quite good. A little bit mixed when it came to the CGI, but it was still effective. And that's, you know, even though it's kind of caked in CGI, this particular character, her performance still came through. Like, there is a sadness there. You could kind of feel what the character is sort of feeling just through sort of how sort of her performance comes through. You could still sense the sadness, and it's all like through the eyes, as well as the coldness. And I just like what they did with the Silver Surfer here within the movie. And I think Julia Garner was great at bringing this character to life. Like I said, she was really able to convey kind of the coldness as well as the sadness behind the character, which just gave it a little bit of depth. Like, it's not the most complex character ever, but it still had a weight to it due to how the character was written, brought to life, and performed. And as I said, all the cast are great here. Other than some of the issues I had with feeling like some of the characters were just felt a little sidelined, like they became sort of supporting characters really within their own film. I still enjoyed every moment that they're on the screen. Vanessa Kirby is just great as Sue. She effectively conveys the power of what a mother will do for her child. That kind of that kind of very guttural, raw emotion, really, of what it means to be a mother and to protect your own child. I think Vanessa Kirby does a really good job at conveying that, as well as the kind of the more somber and dramatic moments really between her and Reed, and how her frustrations within this relationship and the challenges she faces with the world that she's supposed to save. I think Vanessa Kirby does a wonderful job at really conveying all of this and what the character's got to go through. Pedro Pascal, who seems to be in everything at the moment, as Reed Richards, is also really great. You know, he's really great here. I loved what he was doing with the character. In fact, I think he was perfect casting. And again, he does a really good job at conveying these kind of mix of emotions. Like, there are a lot of moments where you can sense and feel what the character is feeling. And again, then, you know, down to his performance, adding to the weight and the intensity of the threat, of those high stakes that they're up against. And it's all brought to life and aided by Pedro Pascal's performance here. I felt like there are moments, like, these are heroes, they are playing superheroes, but there are moments, especially when they're having to confront the world and sort of the press, where you could sense that vulnerability there. And that is something that's often missing in these movies, especially within the MCU. And it's something that I feel like they've done a much better job at, dare I say it, you know, with the DC universe when it comes to movies like Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and all of that. But that's a subject or discussion for another time. But I feel like they do a fantastic job, especially Pedro, at kind of displaying the vulnerability. You know, he's not just a superhero, but there's a lot more to it. And I think there are a couple of moments that I really liked where you could kind of see sort of, you know, the conflict within him through his performance. And that is just something that I really appreciated about the movie as well, where they do allow these moments, they do kind of fixate on some of these moments and allow these moments to kind of breathe, you could say. And the score by Michael Giacchino. I think that's how you pronounce the name, apologies if it's incorrect, but Michael Giacchino, yeah, fucking cooks when it comes to the score. It's a fantastic score that just elevates the fantastical and science fiction elements of its story, conveying the retro-futuristic tone within its sound beautifully. It elevates every moment, immersing you into the story and just sweeping you up, taking me back to certain, you know, John Williams scores. Like, there is a very kind of classical vibe to the score that I really like, sort of, again, kind of, you know, touching back on how I felt like the story was told and its structure. You know, it has that kind of 90s, early 2000s and even 80s vibe to it. And there's a certain piece of music, I think it's going to be Galactus' theme, I think. But it's a piece of music when they're in space and they're approaching sort of the layer of Galactus. And it's like, wow, it is beautiful. I absolutely dug the score in this movie. And it sort of kind of really does a lot to really bring this experience to life in a way that just elevates it. It just adds to kind of the immersion and just the overall fun and thrill of the story. And I just had a really good time with this movie. And it's been a while since I've been able to say that in regards to a Marvel movie. You know, this Fantastic Four First Steps mostly gets things right. A lot of that is achieved by just stripping it all back and being more focused on its character, as well as successfully immersing us into an already established world that feels fresh and different. It feels exciting. It's not without its flaws. There are issues there, but this was the first time I really felt like they were trying to break out of that very tired Marvel formula. Yes, it's still present, the Marvel formula is still present, but at the same time, it felt like the least Marvel movie, you could say. Like, the only way I could describe that is it feels more like a standalone 90s superhero movie that would have been made, you know, by 20th Century Fox or whatever studio owned the rights at the time. It felt more in that kind of vein. It had more of that vibe to it. And I suppose you could use Deadpool and Wolverine as a recent example of kind of breaking out of that Marvel formula. But other than the profanities that come with the character of Deadpool, you know, it still very much had that Marvel formula intact. Yes, you know, it's a hell of a lot more crude, it's R-rated and all of that, but it was still within the mould, you could say, of the Marvel formula. But with Fantastic Four First Steps, I felt like it felt like they were truly trying to reshape the mould that is the Marvel formula. They were trying to break out of that and reshape that mould and give us something different. And by doing so, it did take me back to phase 1 of the MCU, when it truly felt like we were going back to basics, even though, you know, you've got Galactus and, you know, from a scale, you know, from a perspective of a scale compared to Iron Man, I mean, you know, it's quite out there, you could say. Like I said, going back to the kind of the high fantasy and science fiction, but they did it in a way that, for me anyway, worked. It feels a little bit less afraid of not relying on something that is very familiar when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and just remembering, again, you know, and sort of really kind of exploring in a way that, again, don't get me wrong, it's not overly complex, it's not, you know, it's not going to put, you know, emotionally through the ringer, but it's enough to kind of suck you into the story and have a good time, have a fun time, and care about its characters, as well as kind of really sort of take you back to a certain era of film. And even though, you know, I've got minor gripes, issues here and there, I think, you know, a lot of it is just personal preference with a lot of these issues. But yeah, look, enough rambling on. I think I've rambled on enough here. First Steps. Had a real good time. I highly recommend it, and I will be giving Fantastic Four First Steps. They are my thoughts on Fantastic Four First Steps. But what did you guys think? Have you seen it yet? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, then thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. It will always overwhelm me that so many of you do want to follow just some random Welsh geek ramble on about film and pronounce things incorrectly, but it does truly mean the world to me that every time one of you supports or connects to the channel, or whatever it be, liking, commenting, subscribing, it will always mean the world to me. I absolutely love doing this, and as I've said previously, I've got so much planned for the channel. There's so much I want to do with the channel. For me, really, to have this conduit to just share my love for film, my passion for film with like-minded people. I'm hoping to hit 1,000 subscribers. I've given myself 1,000 subscribers for the end of the year as a goal. I'm not quite sure I'm going to hit that. I think, well, we're coming into August already, but I'm currently sat at 518, and that alone, I mean, just means the world. So yeah, when it comes to future movie reviews, my next cinema release review will be for The Naked Gun. I'm quite looking forward to that. I've liked the trailers. Not everything has worked for me in the trailers, but I am quite intrigued. I am looking forward to checking it out. I think Liam Neeson can be quite funny, and I just like Liam Neeson anyway as an actor. That's it from me for now. Enough rambling from me. Thank you all for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.